All right, ladies and gentlemen, we now have a little bit of an experiment for the evening. We wanted to create an opportunity not just for you to see the videos and participate in the silent auction, but to actually be part of a conversation as it relates to FOCOS and what it's been doing for the past 2 decades and what it plans to do now in the future, what its ambitions are. So we will allow you to ask a few questions to our esteemed panelists up here on stage after I get my questions in and get a sense of how this organization works. We have folks on either side of the room with microphones, so as this conversation goes on and you get a question that pops into your mind that perhaps you're curious about as you've been meeting the people at your table and as you've been learning more about FOCOS, or perhaps you're someone who's known and been with this organization for decades, you'll be able to get your questions answered as well with the folks on either side of the room. So without further ado, let me give us a round of applause for our panel up here on stage. We have Dr. Rick Hodes next to me, Dr. Boachie, of course, and Yao Asamoah on the end. Let's just begin by having you each, well, Dr. Boachie, of course, we know who you are, but let's have you each introduce yourselves and give us a sense of how you fit within the bigger picture of FOCOS.
Thanks. My name is Rick Hodes. I'm medical director of the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, an NGO which is based in New York, but I've lived in Ethiopia for 30 years. I'm the only spine doctor in all of Ethiopia. That's for 105 million people. In 1999, I was the doctor at Mother Teresa's mission, where I still work. And I met 2 abandoned orphans with tuberculosis of the spine. One of them had a 90-degree angle. One of them had a 120-degree angle. I wanted to help these 2 guys, and I couldn't get them free surgery, so I got this brilliant idea that I would adopt them, add them to my health insurance, bring them to the United States, and get them surgery. So the problem is when you adopt an abandoned orphan who has no relatives, they become yours for life. So on one hand, I could get them, I could straighten their backs. On the other hand, we would have to spend the rest of our lives together. And I thought about this, and then the Almighty sent me a message, and he said, do it. So I went ahead and I adopted them, added them to my health insurance, brought them down to Texas Scottish Rite Hospital. The wonderful docs down there operated on the 2 of them. And of those 2 guys, one of them is now in pharmacy school in Atlanta, and one of them is now a businessman and an art dealer in Ethiopia. Another kid came along. He had a bad back. I adopted him, added him to my health insurance. Aetna loves me, by the way.
What are you doing?
And I brought him down to Dallas, and he had spine surgery. Now, serial adoption is probably not the answer to spine problems in Africa. So then I met this gentleman, Dr. Boachie, in 2005, and he and I have been working together ever since. So I'm actually an internal medicine doctor, trained at Johns Hopkins. I became the only spine doctor in all of Ethiopia. So I now, every day, see patients in the basement of a busy city hospital, and I have the only spine clinic for 105 million people. So every day I see 10, 15, 20, 30 patients. Every day we get 2 or 3 new ones, a bunch of old ones. I had these 2 guys who walked into my office about 9 months ago. One of them was a 32-year-old Orthodox priest. One of them was his 24-year-old younger brother. And I was sitting there, they were standing in front of me, and I said to one of them, my gosh, your shoes are really dirty. And he said, yeah, we walked here. And I said, you walked? The bus station is 8 miles away. He said, no, we walked from Gojam. I said, Gojam, that's 350 miles. He said, wow. We walked. Yeah, he said, we didn't have $20 for a bus fare, so we walked for 8 days to get to you. So I said to them the obvious question, where did you sleep at night? And this just shows you the amazing thing about Ethiopian culture. He answered me in Amharic. He said, Xavier Engeda. Xavier Engeda means guest of God. That means in Ethiopian Highland Christian culture, you can knock on any door and say, I'm a guest sent to you by God. Please let me in. somebody knocks on my door and says, I'm a guest sent to you by God. I'm going to call 911. Right? Every night, they slept in a different stranger's house. They gave them a basin of water. They gave them soap to wash their feet. They gave them a very big meal, and they showed them off in the morning. These are some of the poorest people in the world. A third of the country lives on less than $1.50 a day, which is the UN poverty level. And this is how they treat each other. So this is really amazing. So I started working with Dr. Boachie. Now I send him 50 patients or so a year. We send them in groups of about 20, 25 people. Dr. Boachie will tell you what happens to them, but they go into traction, and we get very, very nice results. I believe that I have the largest collection of the worst spines in the world. And with this gentleman's help, we're giving them a much better life. And we're making new medical discoveries at the same time.
It's incredible. Incredible. So, Dr. Boachie, tell us how this all began for you, because the theme of what Dr. Hodes is saying there is that there is a massive need, and it was the need for this type of quality care that has propelled him to do what he's doing today and work with you. Where did it begin for you?
Well, actually, it began when I first landed in the United States, and that was when I was 20 years old, I was saying. So I came in the US basically to study, become a good doctor, make a lot of money, and then go back and help. I didn't know how. Well, it took me 40 years to be able to accomplish that. Wow. And during that 40-year period, I was going back and forth trying to understand the culture and the terrain. So we had an argument one day when I told my wife that, honey, I don't think we can go back. And she said, why can't we go back? I said, well, right now I'm overqualified. I'm a very accomplished spine surgeon. There are no facilities, there are no instrumentation, there's no residency program, so I'm overqualified. So let's just stay here. And she said, well, then I'll leave you alone. I said, you're not going anywhere without me. So we brainstormed overnight, and then she said, then why don't you establish an organization that you can use as a vehicle to get support and go help people? So FOCOS was born after that argument. Wow. And I said, how am I going to do that? Well, lo and behold, we went to Ghana one day, and her mother fell and broke her hip. And she said, that's the case for you. So it took me, so we actually, in those days, that was way back in the 90s, so we actually had an air ambulance from Kumasi, brought her to Accra, and then it took me 2 days to round up the surgeons, called HSS for a hip implant to be flown by Delta. So at the end of the operation, I actually had a formula to establish a mission. And we put a hip together, and she walked home. Wow. And she survived. Yeah. So right after that, I came back to the US, and I said, well, now I have a template. So I'm going to use that template to establish missions. So I formed FOCOS in 1999, put in the first $100,000. Then I called some of my patients, and they all rushed in to help. So it was established in New York City, and then I started these missions where we're going back with groups to do surgeries. But we're working out of a government hospital. So I think it was back in 1999, and Betty Wright, who is in the audience, so it was Betty Wright and myself. I think the first team was Betty Wright, myself, Ron Perret, and Rosemary. And the four of us basically went in and did the first spine surgery, and then we did a hip operation. And then from there on, we had volunteers from all over the world who started chipping in. So now I had a practice in New York and a practice in Ghana. Wow. And we're going back and forth twice a year because now we had a template. And one day I had a patient from Ethiopia who was referred to us. We operated on his back and he had a complication. And that was paralysis. But he recovered, but not fully. And he was going to go back to Ethiopia, and I didn't know anybody to send him to. So the sister who lives in Washington called me and said, there is a Dr. Hodes in Ethiopia, and maybe you can call him up. So she gave me Rick's number, and he was visiting Texas then. So I called Rick and I said, Rick, I have a patient that I've operated on, and he's going back to Ethiopia. He needs steroids. He needs to be watched. And Rick said, I'll take care of him. So Rick went back, called the patient, took care of the patient, and at the end of the day, he said, by the way, I have a few more patients that you can see. That's when I realized that Edna was catching up with him. So I said, fine, I'll be in Ghana, so send me your patients. So he started sending me emails and emails of patients. So we had the first 5 patients come to see us from Ethiopia in 2006. And then that's when the relationship started. And then since then, we've been going to Ethiopia every 6 months. And then I'll go with a team of 3. So we have patients who have had surgery, children who need lengthening. So these are kids who have had an operation, but it's not complete because they are too young that you cannot fuse them. So every 6 months, we have to open the back and lengthen it. Wow. So that we can do without a lot of instrumentation and anesthesia. Each will take about half an hour. So we will line up about 25 patients to be lengthened. So in between the lengthening and his clinic means 200 patients a day.
Yeah.
Wow, that is incredible.
And they are the worst patients, and he gives me only 4 minutes per patient. Because I have to go through 200 patients in a day. So my lunch is water and peanuts.
Yeah, literally.
That is astounding.
And that's all he gives me. But we work through these cases, and my team will be upstairs doing the lengthening, so I go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So in 3 days, we will lengthen 26 patients, see 200 patients, and then we'll categorize them 1 to 5 in terms of the urgency to those who can wait. So a patient who has seen with a level 1 will come to Ghana maybe in 6 months. But if you're 2, you probably won't come to Ghana in 2 years. Wow. So there's a huge backlog in Ethiopia. And it's not only in Ethiopia that has 100 million people, but even in Ghana. Right now, we have about 1,000 patients who need surgery, but we don't have the resources to treat all of them. So we only treat those that we have the means to treat. That is the resources like the funding and also the instrumentation. And for the past 20 years that I've been doing this, since 2006, when I became one of the product development team members of K2M, they have sponsored every instrumentation that we have used to treat the patients in Ghana, giving us close to $200,000 every year. So it's the combination and the partnership with K2M, giving us the spine implants, the hospitals for special surgery, the volunteer training programs, and also some of the equipment that I mentioned earlier, and then the resources that we're able to obtain from the donors in this room. We're able to treat about 400 patients every year.
Wow. So relationships are important, cooperation's important, and arguments with the wife help too, because they get you to... I'm going to tell my fiance that.
Constructive argument.
Constructive, okay, I'll remember that. And Yao, knowing that the logistics had to be figured out, the money had to come from somewhere, this has all kind of grown over time. Explain to us your role and what you know about the importance of understanding the books of something like this, the financial books.
So first of all, sitting in the third seat next to these guys was a bad idea because they're hard acts to follow. But my role essentially as chairman of the board is to really help them source the resources to be able to execute on their vision, right? You know, it obviously starts with a lot of passion, as you've just heard from Dr. Boachie and Dr. Hodes, but there's a business of actually running the organization. How do we marshal all the resources to be able to treat these 500 plus cases a year, to run a full-fledged hospital with 200 plus employees, to all the things that we need to do to keep the lights on, to keep the operating rooms function. It takes a lot of effort and resources, and so my role is to really help them strategize around how we do that and to coordinate with donors and people like yourselves to really figure out how we can execute on our agenda. We've got a very ambitious agenda over the next 4 or 5 years. Some of you heard we're going to be looking to raise a pretty significant endowment. We've got operating budget that's multi-million dollars each year to be able to fund these surgeries, and so it's really you need someone who's thinking about all those issues and sort of where that funding pipeline is going to come from, and that's really where I come in.
Why this vision to grow so massively, and what difference does it make for the backlog? And I'm so curious about the backlog both in Ghana and in Ethiopia, because while some are getting the treatment they need thanks to money donated, there are so many others who are continuing their lives with their condition. So why such an aggressive plan?
And that's a great question, Errol, and I think these guys can expand on it. But the nature of this illness is such that, first off, the majority of our patients are children and young adults. So when you look at the surgeries that were performed, that's sort of the segment where this illness impacts the most. If these conditions go untreated, most of these children will ultimately die, right? And if you look at the West Africa region, there are no facilities with the kind of expertise and capabilities that we have. So we're really the only port of call for these patients. And so, it's great that we're able to accommodate 400 or 500 patients a year, but you've got to also think about what about that 1,000 in our backlog that we're not going to be able to treat. What's going to happen to them? Are they going to survive? How much time do they have? And the only thing that separates them from life and something more unfortunate is our ability to marshal the resources to be able to bring them in to perform these surgeries. So that's why we think it's really important. So we're basically viewing this as it's a market that is underserved, right? We have only so much capacity. We're a 70-bed facility, right? But if we had 100 beds or 150 beds, more doctors trained, that's all the more work and impact we could have. And so I think from our perspective as an organization, we view it as really, really mission critical for us to be able to get the resources we need to be able to expand our capacity.
Dr. Boachie, explain how you determine who to treat, how to treat them. I can't imagine how heart-wrenching it must be to be in a situation where you have to turn someone away, knowing what that means. Talk us through, I know you talked about the numbering system when you're kind of doing evaluations, but talk us through what that feels like for you to have to make those determinations.
Yeah, it's a very, very difficult decision when you have a patient who needs help, but you cannot help. And the way we go about selecting the patient is on the basis of need and the urgency. If you're a young child who has a spine deformity, we know the natural history is not good. So that patient should have an intervention performed. So we do whatever we can to bring that patient in. So in Ethiopia, for instance, if I call a patient NF, it's not neurofibromatosis, by the way, it means next flight. That patient should get on the next flight.
Right.
So we go by severity of the condition, the younger the patient, the age of the patient, and also those who are able to support themselves. But most of them can't. I mean, from Ethiopia, for instance, they're all sponsored by JDC. So we have level 1, 2, 3. So the ones are the patients who are young, have severe deformity, and need intervention right away. And then the teenagers, most of the teenagers have already gone through some of their growth spurt. So their curves are not developing or progressing as fast as the younger ones. So those patients can wait for a year or two. Because if you're at 60 degrees, if you come in at 80 degrees, we can still treat you. But if you come in at 100 degrees, we don't want to wait. We have to go in right away. And then a patient may come in their late 20s, who have maybe a 150-degree curve. Well, that patient needs surgery, but the resources to treat that patient will take care of 10 patients.
Wow.
Yeah. So unfortunately, we tell those patients you have to wait, and we give you supportive care, which means we may never get to them. But ideally, they also should be treated. But we don't, because I can take care of 10 children with the resources that I'll have to use for that 30-year-old.
I guess that speaks to just how valuable resources are. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I think it should be noted that we take a lot, we go through a lot of effort to make sure that we are in fact a low-cost provider, right? So when you look at the complexity of these surgeries, If you were to do these surgeries in the US, they would cost anywhere from $100,000 to $150,000 for surgeries. And we're doing them for typically a range of $10,000 to $15,000 per surgery. And so the way we're able to provide that low-cost service is with the help of hundreds of volunteers who are obviously celebrating tonight, who come in and donate their time at the hospital, people from HSS and other facilities who come in and do free surgeries. All of those things impact our ability to deliver low-cost service at $10,000 to $15,000. That said, if you look at the macro statistics, whether it's Ghana, whether it's Ethiopia, really frankly the whole region, that cost, as cheap as it is relative to the US, is still prohibitively expensive for your average patient. They can't afford it.
Even though it's a tenth
Even
of
though
what it
it's
costs
a tenth,
here.
yeah, 10 cents on the
Still
dollar.
out of reach.
Yeah. So it's sort of like we're offering low-cost service, but then we still have to go the next step of securing the funding in order to allow people to be able to get these procedures done.
I just want to hear a round of applause for the volunteers who make that possible. Hearing that really hits it home.
But if we have an endowment fund, just like most of the institutions in the United States, educational and health institutions that have endowment funds to support students with scholarships, you can do the same thing. With an endowment fund, patients can be treated through the proceeds of that fund, for instance, because there's no private health insurance system that pays for anybody in the country. The national health insurance takes care of nothing but the code. So if you have a specialty medical problem, whether it's cancer, spine deformity, or heart condition, you have to pay out of pocket. And if you're not rich, you can't.
One of the things I'm just wondering, Dr. Hodes, is what are the types of things that cause these deformities? Is it as common in Ethiopia, in Ghana, as it is elsewhere in the world? And
Well,
this is just something that happens?
In the United States, the rate of spinal deformity is 3%.
3%.
Right. And it's often teenage girls. So we have that condition, the adolescent idiopathic scoliosis. On the other hand, we also have a lot of congenital scoliosis. 5% of my patients have something called neurofibromatosis, which is genetic. We have old polio. And then 1/3 of my patients have tuberculosis of the spine. People think of TB as a lung disease, which of course it is. But TB, especially in Africans, can affect the spine, and it turns a straight spine into a V. And it's very, very common. I mean, every week we have patients coming in with 90, 100, 120-degree angles from TB of the spine in this symmetrical V shape. And then we have to deal with that. So it's a variety of things.
I want to hear, and we'll see some of these stories a bit later as well, but from your experience, some of the success stories. The difference between getting treatment when they're young at the right time, and not getting treatment. What kind of changes have you seen in your patients?
Well, let me show him a case. So this is a knee replacement. So we talk about arthritis of the knees. Even those conditions, they come in and you say, wait a minute, this is a windswept deformity of a patient before and after surgery. This is not your garden variety knee that you want to replace, but it's very, very challenging. And then these are some of the spines that Rick Hodes sees. Now, I've never seen this even when I was in the United States.
Wow.
And we don't have names for them. These are not scoliosis. There's a doctor here who's very well experienced, Dr. Lenke. Is this a scoliosis? It's not a scoliosis. It's really a twisted spine. We call them the alpha spine and the omega spine. So to be able to treat this, we put these patients in contraptions, like the trachea, for like 6 months to unwind them. And if we're lucky to unwind them, then hopefully we can stabilize them. But Rick we call it a Rick's case. So these are one of his level 1 cases. A teenager with this deformity, all right? And we put this boy in trachea for like 5 months. And finally, we were able to treat him. And that's after the treatment.
This is 5 months later. Unbelievable.
So someone...
And a smile on his face as well.
Now, Rick has a way of measuring success.
I'm shrinking.
We call him Dr. Rick's benchmark. They have the same waistline, but you can see that this same waistline, double shoulders.
Yeah.
We're able to match this boy after surgery. That's one operation, but he was with us for 8 months.
What about the pain
So
these
if we talk
patients
about
experience?
$20,000, it's not even that enough.
Are they experiencing a high amount of pain before surgery? Does that get
These kids are incredibly resilient. They go home with Tylenol.
Tylenol, is
Yeah.
it?
They're unbelievable.
I'm going to pick my jaw up off the ground. It's amazing. And so what are the barriers, if any, to trying to expand the kind of care that you do and getting it to more people? What help do you need?
It's really early detection, so there has to be a mass education that this is not a taboo. So in Africa, if you have these conditions, I know places like in Nigeria, some of the judgment actually go for patients with scoliosis to kill them because they believe they have magic blood. It's crazy. So they hide them. And then children's parents, a husband may leave because he believes that the mother has brought a witch or a bondage or some kind of a curse into the family. So that mass education is going on that this is not a curse. The fact that you don't have a cure or an understanding of a condition doesn't mean you are cursed. It is a condition that exists all over the world, and I show them pictures of patients from all over the world. So they come out now. They're not hiding. So by seeing them early and intervening early, your job is much easier, and it's also less costly, and the complications are fewer. So that education is one, and early detection, and then again having the resources to treat them. Because we may find them, if you don't have the resources, I mean, we'll have K2M giving us all the implants, but sometimes it's not even enough. So I'll go into the operating room, and I will need a 5.5 by 35 millimeter screw, but I don't have it. So I say, give me a 5.5 by 50, and give me a ruler, so I cut it down. So I manufacture it right there.
Wow.
Also, yeah, I think
I do want to remind you all, you can ask our esteemed panel some questions as well. So try and corral down the nearest microphone to you. Yeah, go ahead. You were going
No, I
to.
was going to say another very important part of the equation is training for the future, right? So it's when you look at the amazing work that Dr. Boachie has done, he's obviously not going to be around forever. So we need to think about the next 10 years and the next 15 years. And the very important part of that equation is making sure that we've got a pipeline of other orthopedic surgeons who can treat these sort of cases. And if you look at Ghana, for example, there's only 20 plus orthopedic surgeons in a country of almost 30 million people, right? Wow. That's just not sustainable. Even if we took on all the patients that we possibly could handle in the hospital, we still probably wouldn't make a dent in terms of serving the people who need the help. So, one of the things that we've got in our strategy is to build a FOCOS Institute, which is going to really be a center of learning and excellence for all of West Africa, really dedicated towards training the next generation of doctors, which I think is
replicate some Dr.
Yeah.
Boachie's and Dr. Hodes out there.
Yeah.
Okay, do we have some questions from the audience? Hands up, microphone close to you. Please introduce yourself and let us know which panelist your question is for. I think we have someone on this side of the room.
Hi, my name is Tina Marie, and my question is for Dr. Boachie. Has there ever been a case that was too difficult or beyond your level of expertise that you can handle, and how did you handle it?
Well, there have been cases, and in my practice, I will say that for the 35 years that I've been operating as a spine surgeon, I've had 2 cases that I didn't know what to do, and I had a dream working with a professor who was taking me through an operation, and I got up and I did the same operation. But that professor hasn't shown up in a long time. So now when I have a case that if the patient may be too old or too sick, recently Rick sent us a case, and that patient's breathing capacity was just 6%. And we did an echocardiogram, and the oxygenation was 34%. So that's a patient who will not survive surgery. I can do the operation, but he will not survive. He will die on the table. A patient like that will just say, we cannot help you, we'll send back. So there are instances where we don't want to do any harm, and then we just have to say, no, we can't help you.
What
so
about
that's
for you,
one.
Dr. Hodes? Any memories you have of seeing someone that was just, it was too risky?
Oh, all the time. All the time. I mean, patients come in. I lost two 15-year-old girls a few years ago because their breathing capacity was 15%. So their entire FVC, forced vital capacity, their entire lung capacity was 300 cc's. 300 cc's is a can of Coca-Cola. So here we are in Ethiopia, 8,000 feet above sea level, and their entire lung capacity is one can of Coca-Cola. You get a touch of pneumonia, you can't breathe and you die. So that happens all the time. So that's why we really need early detection to try to find these
So the
cases.
most severe cases, will say no.
And you know, I sit there, I literally read a couple of Psalms from the Bible, say a prayer, ask the Lord to help me, and I'll try to pick my next surgery list. And I tell people, they say, how can you play God? And I said, the only thing worse than playing God is not playing God and just choosing by random. So that's what we have to do, and that's what I do several times a year, is choosing my patients to send to Ghana.
Having people's lives in your hands and the pressure you both must feel is just astounding to me. Any other questions that you might have out there for our panelists? Raise your hand if there's a microphone nearby. I'm seeing some hands on this side of the room. Oh.
Hello, my name's Tyler Ropes. I'm a medical student.
Oh.
And I particularly was interested in when you guys were mentioning education as kind of the future and carrying FOCOS forward. And you know, I have a couple other medical students here as well from Columbia, and we're just kind of wondering maybe you know, if you could remark more on how exactly we could help, or that generation can help in this process.
Great question.
Yeah. Excellent question. I mean, we would love to have a partnership or affiliation with an institution like Columbia, but if you look at what we are doing, it's really, really very highly specialized. This is like postgraduate. So for a medical student, it will be so far above you that you may not get much out of it. A medical student can help at the different levels, such as the patient evaluation, clinical assessment, and then observing the sequences and the protocols that we use. That's great. But to be able to do what we're doing, you can't even do it after your orthopedic training or your neurosurgical training. You need like 3 more years.
It's highly
Then after you need like 5 more years. So it is so highly specialized that at the medical student level, you only learn very, very basics. But if you continue to show interest in advanced training, then you have to continue to come back, you know, for more training. So we actually have the K2M mini fellowships, where we have surgeons who have finished their training, who want to come for more training, or surgeons in practice who want to see very complex cases. I mean, most of the surgeons who come have been in training for like 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and they see for the first time a very horrible case. So it will be a lifelong training, not just in medical school.
But you're saying that as a way of encouraging them to continue the pursuit, right? I think so.
On the other hand,
Just reading between the lines.
on the other hand, as a non-surgeon, the medical students can hang out in clinic with me and see lots of things that they will never see.
Hang out.
Yes.
But how important is the observation for a young medical
But it
student?
is
people
important.
who are
I
interested?
remember my first exposure to a scoliosis case was when I was in medical school. You know, and that was the first time I knew about the condition scoliosis. And I asked Dr. Mickelson at Columbia, what is this? And he says it's scoliosis. So, oh, acha, that's how we call it. So I really recognized for the first time, oh, it can be treated. And as a medical student, I was working in a blood bank. And I was giving Hugo Keim, who was then the guru of scoliosis surgery, 6 pints of blood for every operation. I said, what kind of surgery do you need 6 pints of blood for? But he was treating just simple adolescent idiopathic scoliosis. So I became more interested in, well, let me learn about this condition, because curious about what it is. But it took me 40 years. So you need the exposure first, and then continue to pursue the interest. and then acquire the additional training, which is long-term.
And then what, for both of you, what has been key as far as being successful, continuing this, whether it's spiritual, personal, you know, beyond the actual medical diagnosis and such?
You have to be cool, calm, and collected, pray a lot,
Yeah.
Stamina.
and have faith.
Stamina is key.
You got to keep going. You got
And
to
then
keep.
have the support, you know, because you can't do it without the support. I mean, if it weren't for all the people here who are contributing, JDC giving us about $1 million a year to treat the Ethiopian patients, and then other resources that we get from industry, we won't be able to do anything. I'm only one man.
Only one man. All right, our time is just about up. We want to get another question in. I think we have one right in the back of the room.
Hi, my name is Margarita. I'm just curious as to what actually causes scoliosis or whatever it is, that they have a lot of people in Ethiopia that have it compared to Ghana.
Yeah, so it's not that they have a lot of people. The condition is the same throughout the world. Well, 2 to 3% of the population will have scoliosis, which is a curvature of the spine. The majority are hereditary. You know, it runs in families, even though we don't know the exact genetic cause. So that type of idiopathic scoliosis is the same throughout the world. You will see it in every country. But we do have specific conditions, like he mentioned, like tuberculosis. I only saw 2 tuberculosis patients for the 35 years I was in practice in the United States. But in Ghana, I see at least 1 every week in clinic, because we have more tuberculosis infections, okay? And that leads to destruction of the spine and then a collapse of the vertebra. So those are different, but for the general or the garden variety adolescent idiopathic scoliosis, it's the same everywhere. We see a lot of them in Ghana and Nigeria and Ethiopia because they haven't been treated. So it is a backlog. That's what it is. Here you have school screening. Pediatricians look for the condition, and school nurses look for the condition. Parents look for it. So as soon as a child develops scoliosis, here at say 40 degrees, it is known, and there's intervention, a brace, 50 degrees operation. There you can find it, but you won't have treatment. So you live with it. So it's a backlog. It's not that it is more common there. Idiopathic scoliosis is the same everywhere, but that's just the backlog that has created an impression that it is more over there. No.
And let's give another round of applause for our fantastic panel and some insight into how FOCOS functions. Dr. Boachie, Dr. Hodes, and Asamoah, thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Incredible work and some really interesting anecdotes from what you've been doing. Thank you.